Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories this hour. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says no talks with the United States will happen while Israeli attacks continue. He claims Washington has repeatedly pushed for negotiations, but there's no place for dialogue under aggression. The White House says Trump will decide within 2 weeks whether to join Israeli strikes on Iran. Israel continues its offensive, hitting dozens of targets in Tehran, including missile production sites. One person is killed and 14 are injured as Russian drone strikes Odessa overnight, damaging high-rises and railway links, officials have said. Ukraine's main Black Sea port has faced relentless attacks since the war began. A US appeals court says Trump can control National Guard troops in Los Angeles despite objections from California Governor Gavin Newsom. The panel ruled his actions were lawful even without rotating orders through the state governor. Armenian leader Nikol Pashinyan arrives in Turkey for talks with President Erdogan in what Yerevan calls a historic move for regional peace. The visit marks a rare step towards thawing decades of hostility between the two nations. British MPs will decide Friday whether to advance a bill legalising assisted dying for the terminally ill, a potential landmark social reform. Backers say it offers dignity, but others warn vulnerable people could be put at risk. Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra risks losing her majority as key party plans to demand her resignation just 10 months in. Under fire over the economy and a border dispute with Cambodia, she now faces planned protests and troop visits amid growing pressure. Zen Hao Zhu, called one of the UK's most prolific predators, gets life in prison for drugging and raping 10 women in the United Kingdom and in China. Police fear dozens more victims and say 24 more women have come forward since the trial. Our top story today, as the Iran-Israel conflict enters its 8th straight day, Iran state media claims it foiled an assassination attempt on Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. A top advisor to the minister, Mohammad Hussein Rang Baran, says intelligence agents intercepted the plot in Tehran days ago. He described it as a devastating plot and accused Israel of masterminding the attack. Araghchi has now ruled out any talks with the US, is what he told state television, that, quote, America is a partner to Israeli crimes against Iran. He says no dialogue is possible until Israel halts its attacks. Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi says there will be no talks with the United States while Israeli strikes continue, calling America a partner in Israel's attacks against Iran. Here's what the Iranian Foreign Minister had to say.
تکلیف رو بگذارید روشن بکنم. ما در شرایط حاضر و در شرایطی که تهاجمات رژیم صهیونیستی ادامه داره خواهان مذاکره با هیچ کسی نیستیم. و آمریکا یعنی در خصوص این موضوع با هیچ کسی ما خواهان مذاکره نیستیم. آمریکایی‌ها خواهان مذاکره هستند. چند بار هم پیام دادن. پیام‌های خیلی جدی هم دادند. ولی ما صراحتاً به اونها گفتیم که تا وقتی که این تهاجم و تجاوز متوقف نشه اصولاً حرف از گفتگو زدن، حرف از دیپلماسی زدن جایی نداره. ما در حال دفاع مشروع هستیم از خودمون و دفاع به هیچ وجه متوقف نمیتونه بشه. و با آمریکا به عنوان شریک این جنایات هم.
Now on the military front, Israel continues its military campaign inside Iran. The Israeli army says it struck dozens of targets in the Iranian capital, including a center tied to Iran's nuclear weapons research. Tel Aviv defends the strikes as necessary to halt Iran's missile and nuclear capabilities. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has warned that Hezbollah against joining the war, saying Israel has lost patience with terrorists and will respond forcefully if threatened from Lebanon. In response, Iran activated air defences over Tehran. The Red Crescent says 5 hospitals were damaged and it plans to report the incident to the international prosecutors. Iraqchi says Iran will not hold talks with the US until Israel's aggression stops. This comes as the White House says President Trump will decide within 2 weeks whether the US will enter the war. Now in Geneva, British Foreign Secretary David Lammy is meeting with his EU and Iranian counterparts to push for de-escalation. The UK and US both say Iran must never obtain a nuclear weapon. Germany says it's open to further talks if Iran shows seriousness about providing nuclear assurances. Berlin urges diplomacy amid growing tensions. We're now joined by Rohan Gunaratne, who's a Middle East affairs and international affairs expert. He's located in Singapore. Rohan, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. I first of all want to start with this alleged assassination plot against Iran's top diplomat, Mr. Abbas Araghchi. How credible are these claims, especially as they've come directly from Iran?
It is very credible because Israel has a very clear plan to dismantle not only the military and the defense industrial complex, especially the nuclear and the missile capabilities, but also to target the political leadership. So the next wave of attacks that Israel will mount and has mounted is to eliminate the political and the religious leadership that governs Iran, because Israel is determined for there to be a regime change, and the regime change will take place only if the tier 1 leadership is eliminated, and Israel is now moving in that direction in many ways, very similar to what they did with the Lebanese Hezbollah of eliminating 2 successive secretary generals.
Now, Rohan, we'll move on to Europe in a minute, and Geneva in particular, but Iran has stated that they will not negotiate with the United States until Israel stops its attacks. Can Iran afford to make a decision like this amidst the bombardment that they are facing?
Israel will continue to dismantle the Iranian defense, military, intelligence infrastructure. Israel will not stop its offensive, and at some point the United States will join because the Israeli capabilities are insufficient to dismantle the nuclear infrastructure that is located in certain mountains. So to reach those facilities, US is very likely to join, and there are very clear indications US and British capabilities are moving, both aviation and maritime capabilities are now moving to the Middle Eastern region. Iran has no escape from the wrath of Israel and of Western nations because they are aware of Iran's fissile and missile capabilities.
Now, Rohan, we have not seen any conflict between them two thus far in regards to this specific situation. However, we've had statements from both Hezbollah and Israel. Hezbollah saying it certainly isn't neutral in this conflict, and Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz saying that stopping Hezbollah from getting involved. It hasn't yet entered the conflict, but how likely is it that Hezbollah, the Iran-backed proxy group, does enter this conflict?
Hezbollah has been severely weakened. It has been crippled. Hezbollah is unable to be an aggressive proxy of Iran anymore. And Israel has developed a strategy of conducting preemptive strikes wherever there is a threat to Israel. So it has, in the last 24 hours, attacked Hezbollah build-up. So Israel's now strategy and mindset is to dismantle a threat anywhere. But in the last 24 hours, we have seen another proxy, which is based in Iraq, that has a strength of over 10,000 fighters, threatening not only Israel, but threatening Western forces, threatening the Americans and the Europeans from getting involved in this fight. So it is so important for the international community now to work together to ensure that these proxies are dismantled, so that we will have a new Middle East, a Middle East where there is peace and stability and security.
Now, Rohan, moving over to these talks in Geneva, we have UK and EU foreign ministers there, along with, as we've said previously, Iran's top diplomat, Abbas Araghchi. Could this be a realistic pathway to de-escalation? What are they expecting? What are the individuals at these talks expecting to get out of them?
Israel has a very clear plan to ensure there's regime change, to oust the existing regime. But certainly the European leaders are determined for there to be a negotiated settlement. I personally believe, having studied this conflict in great detail, that the timeline is over. And what is going to happen is the Americans will start their campaign in the coming days, and they will not stop short of regime change. President Trump has already said that he wants an unconditional surrender on the part of the Iranian leadership.
Professor Rohan Gunaratne, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. For our next story, we move over to Europe, where in the latest on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Russia claims control of the Moskivka region in Ukraine's Kharkiv area. The Kremlin has declined to predict if a Putin-Trump meeting will happen this year, citing global instability. Moscow continues its special military operation in Ukraine, favouring diplomacy but acknowledging Kiev's unpredictability. Talks with Ukraine are still ongoing, with the next round expected next week. Meanwhile, Russia's state atomic energy cooperation, Rosatom, has reported no incidents at the Bushehr nuclear power plant in Iran last night. Rosatom head Alexei Likachev said they hope all messages sent yesterday have reached Israeli leadership, and assured the public that work at the plant continues as normal. However, Russia has warned that a strike on the Bushehr plant could trigger a disaster comparable to the 1986 Chernobyl catastrophe. With the situation still evolving, Likachev confirmed that dozens of Russian specialists have been evacuated from Iran. However, he also added that for now, Russia is still prepared to keep its workers at Bushehr and is ready for any scenario, including rapid evacuation if necessary. President Vladimir Putin also said this week that there are currently 250 Russian personnel at the Bushehr plant. And lastly, a Russian drone strike on the Ukrainian city of Odessa has left one person dead and at least 14 others injured, according to the local authorities. Ukraine's Air Force reported that Russia launched 86 drones overnight, with 34 shot down and 36 neutralized through electronic warfare or found to be decoys. We're now joined by Asuma Kataoka, who is an anchor and correspondent for NewsX World. Asuma, how much of more background information can you give us on these ongoing hostilities on the ground between Russia and Ukraine?
So Thomas, just like you said, the latest strike was on Odessa, which is near the border between Ukraine and Russia, and it has killed one person and injured 14 people. And also we have to know that only this week, on Tuesday, which is just 4 days ago, there was a biggest strike on Ukraine by Russia, which killed, let me check the exact numbers here, which killed 28 people, across Kyiv, and 142 others were wounded. Now, the strikes are intensifying, but also from what we know from the reports that latest exchange of prisoners of war is also continuing, which was agreed upon in the last talks in Istanbul. And from what the sources have confirmed, that exchanges has happened between Russia and Ukraine today as well, but the exact details nor the numbers have been disclosed by either of these countries. And also Russian President Vladimir Putin has kind of warned Germany for if Germany was to expand its support on Ukraine and send a missile, a Taurus cruise missile. If it were to send it, then that is, Russia would take it as Germany is also involved in this war. And Germany has confirmed today that it is not going to send this Taurus missile to Ukraine to help support Ukraine. But the situation is fragile across EU as well as Ukraine and Russia, and we don't know what will come out of the next round of talks, and we also don't know who will show up for these talks.
Azuma Kataoka, thank you very much for your insight. For our next story, we do stay in the region now, where Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has turned next year's election into a high-stakes campaign against Ukraine and his main political rival. With his ruling Fidesz party slipping in the polls, Orban is pushing a sweeping anti-Ukraine message, warning of alleged EU and Kyiv plots to overthrow his government. He claims opposition leader Peter Magyar is working with Ukraine and Brussels to install a pro-Western, pro-war regime, charges Magyar flatly denies. Orban says Hungary faces threats from Ukraine's EU membership, cheap labour and even war, using AI-generated videos to depict Hungarian soldiers returning from a front they've never been on. His government has refused to send weapons to Kyiv, blocked their transit, and now portrays any support for Ukraine as treason. The campaign includes a state-funded media blitz and a national consultation, painting Zelensky and EU leaders as threats to Hungarian sovereignty. Meanwhile, Ukraine has stayed measured, but Zelensky has accused Orban of using the war for political gain. Kyiv's foreign ministry called Budapest's rhetoric, quote, off the rails. As Hungary's opposition gains ground, analysts warn Orban could be laying groundwork to discredit or disqualify rivals, possibly reshaping Hungary's democracy ahead of the 2026 election. We move on once again, where in a rare historic event, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has arrived in Istanbul for a working visit to Turkey, a nation which Armenia has never had former diplomatic ties. The visit comes at the invitation of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and the two leaders are set to meet at Istanbul's Dolmabahce Palace. Relations between the two countries have been tense for decades, primarily over the mass killings of Armenians during World War I, which Yerevan recognises as genocide, a label Turkey strongly rejects. Despite their history and Turkey's support for Azerbaijan in its long-standing conflict with Armenia, both sides now appear ready to open a new chapter. Armenia says the visit is a historic step towards regional peace, with talks expected to focus on normalising ties, signing a peace treaty with Azerbaijan, and discussing the broader impact of the Iran-Israel conflict. Now we move over to the Indo-Pacific, where China's military has condemned the sailing of a British warship through the Taiwan Strait as a deliberate attempt to, quote, cause trouble, as Taiwan's president ordered stepped-up monitoring in response to Chinese military activities. Britain's Royal Navy has said that the patrol vessel HMS Spey conducted a routine navigation through the narrow waterway that was part of a long-planned deployment and took place in full compliance with international law. China considers the strait to be Chinese waters, while Taiwan, the United States and some of its allies say it is an international waterway. The Eastern Theatre Command of China's People's Liberation Army said that the sailing of the ship was public hyping and that its forces followed and monitored the Spey. This comes as Taiwan's Defense Ministry reported another spike in Chinese movements close to the island over the previous 24 hours, involving 50 aircraft concentrated in the strait and the top part of the South China Sea. Now, in a related development, China has slammed the European Union over what it calls double standards after Brussels barred Chinese companies from large medical device tenders. The ban applies to contracts over €5 million, roughly 60% of public medical procurement by value, after the EU cited unfair access for European firms in China. The EU says China favours domestic suppliers and offers bidding conditions foreign firms can't meet. Beijing's response: the EU is veering towards protectionism, urging dialogue instead of restrictions. The EU-China dispute adds to existing trade clashes over EV tariffs and rare earth exports, just weeks before a planned summit in July. As Western allies increase presence near Taiwan and Beijing faces trade curbs at home, global tensions are once again in sharp focus. Now we move over to North America, where Hurricane Eric has killed at least 2 people in southern Mexico. The storm made landfall in Oaxaca State before weakening Thursday night. A man died from electrocution while clearing debris near a high-voltage line. A child was swept away by a swollen stream in Guerrero while his mother tried to carry him across. The U.S. National Hurricane Center says Eric was downgraded to a tropical storm with winds of 30 miles per hour. It has still caused major flooding and damage across the Oaxaca, Guerrero, and Puerto Escondido region. Residents in Lagunas de Chacachua were left homeless after strong winds destroyed homes and flooded streets. In Puerto Escondido, power outages and loss of mobile coverage hit thousands. Shops flooded, boats were buried in the sand, and emergency crews worked to clear the debris. President Claudia Sheinbaum said over 123,000 users lost power and 15 roads were closed in Oaxaca. She thanked residents for following evacuation orders, with more than 2,000 shelters also being prepared across the southern states. Heavy rain continues across 5 southern states, including Veracruz and Chiapas. Mexico faces severe storms yearly, especially from May to November. Last year, Hurricane Otis struck Acapulco, killing dozens. Officials warn that storm threats are far from over this season. Now we move north to the United States, where President Donald Trump has extended the deadline for TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, to sell the app to a US buyer by 90 days. Trump signed the order on Thursday, pushing the deadline to September the 17th, 2025. The White House says the extension gives time to secure a safe American-led deal. TikTok has 170 million users in the United States and says it poses no security risk. Amazon, Perplexity AI, and other suitors have shown interest. The Supreme Court still upholds law requiring a sale. Trump says he wants the app to stay online, but under American control. We stay in the United States. California Governor Gavin Newsom has criticized a federal court ruling that allows President Donald Trump to retain control of the California National Guard, calling it disappointing, but noting the court rightly rejected Trump's claim of unchecked power. Newsom stated, quote, "The president is not a king and is not above the law," adding that he and the Attorney General, Rob Bonta, will continue to challenge what they call Trump's authoritarian use of military force against civilians. The Ninth Circuit Court ruled unanimously that Trump's failure to coordinate through the governor didn't invalidate his authority, allowing him to continue federal control of the troops in the area. This comes as the Trump administration deploys 2,000 more California National Guard members to Los Angeles, despite declining protest activity. We move on once again. Violence against children in conflict zones has reached unprecedented levels in 2024. That's according to a United Nations annual report. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said that there has been a staggering 25% surge in the number of grave violations in comparison with 2023. The report verified 41,370 grave violations against children in the year of 2024. There are also a marked increase in the number of child victims of multiple violations to 22,495. In the report's appendix, a list of shame calls out those responsible for these violations. A coalition of Haitian gangs was added this year to the list, while the Israeli armed forces, which were named last year, along with Palestinian militant group Hamas, have remained on the list. We once again return to Europe. British lawmakers could take a major step towards legalising euthanasia in the UK as they hold a vote on whether to allow assisted dying for terminally ill people. Members of Parliament will either progress the legislation or to the House of Lords upper chamber for further scrutiny or end it entirely following several hours of impassioned debate. Protesters both for and against the contentious bill are expected to gather outside Parliament as the third reading takes place inside. The Terminally Ill Adults Bill would allow terminally ill adults with 6 months or less to live to get medical assistance to end their own lives. In November, MPs voted to back the bill introduced by Labour's Kim Leadbeater by a majority of 55. Leadbeater said that she is confident the bill will pass today. Well, that is all we have time for, and we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.